Welcome back to the final episode of What is a Germany? When last we left our heroes, Prussia had asserted its dominance over the many German states, excluding Austria. But a hand of friendship was extended. After all, in the era of liberalism and dangerous new ideas, authoritarian aristocratic monarchies need to stick together, right? But here's probably a good point for me to talk about a lone little country that I've mentioned here and there, but I think deserves a little something: the Principality of Liechtenstein. The German Confederation was founded with 39 members, which collectively have been called the Germanies, and Liechtenstein was one of them. The Principality began as the small little medieval Dietsch county of Vaduz, one of many in the former Duchy of Swabia. In 1719, the Prince of Liechtenstein, named after their Liechtenstein castle in Austria, Joseph Wenzel I, merged the recently acquired county of Vaduz and the smaller lordship of Schellenberg into the sovereign Principality of Liechtenstein, just another small state in the fragmented Holy Roman Empire. Napoleon consolidated much of this mess, often based on his own personal feelings towards their rulers, but Liechtenstein survived, apparently because Prince John I earned the respect of Napoleon. Liechtenstein did participate in the Austro-Prussian War of 1866, but doesn't appear to have seen any action, though they did pick up an Austrian straggler on the way home. Since Liechtenstein is located between Austria and Switzerland, apparently Prussia was unable to gobble it up into the new German Empire, and in 1868 it disbanded its army and declared eternal neutrality, relying on Austria to protect it from the notorious depredations of the Swiss. Not having to worry about national defense, the little alpine country developed into a little tax haven with an incredibly developed economy and strong financial sector. So, we went from 39 to just 4 Germanies: a German Empire, the true Germany; Austria, now Austria-Hungary; Luxembourg, which was secured as a neutral buffer between France and Prussia, and in 1890 was no longer ruled by the King of the Netherlands, but by its own Grand Duke; and little Liechtenstein, an Austrian protectorate. And today there are in this sense still 4 Germanies. Luxembourg and Liechtenstein haven't changed much, but a simple look at the map suggests that the two biggest did enter the 20th century. Now the last quarter of the 19th century saw the German Empire, and to a lesser extent Austria-Hungary, grow and industrialize. Lots of political shenanigans, especially with Austria and the problems a large multi-ethnic state in the age of nationalism faces. Germany even went adventuring abroad and established colonies in Africa, Asia, and the Pacific. Otto von Bismarck wasn't called the Iron Chancellor for nothing, and ruled with a strong hand. But ultimately, his goals were twofold: German strength and European peace. However, in 1890, the new German Emperor William II found himself disagreeing with some of Bismarck's attitudes towards striking workers, and a willingness to be a more active emperor than his predecessors, soon forcing Bismarck to resign. William II, despite his willingness to address social issues in his country, such as poor working conditions, ended up being a bit of a rabble-rouser. A flawed man, William was insecure and self-conscious, especially about a withered left arm, and compensated by a need to glorify both himself and his empire. One particular obsession of his was the Imperial German Navy, which he wanted to rival or even surpass that of the Royal Navy of Britain, the largest of its day. As cool as the German battleships were, such an arms race heightened tensions with Britain, whose public began to view the Kaiser as an unhinged warmonger. Despite what many viewed as a common Germanic, Saxon, and Protestant heritage, Victorian and early 20th century Britain took great pride in its liberal democratic traditions, and contrasted that with the militaristic and authoritarian tendencies of the German state. At the same time, Austria was looking for trouble. Kicked out of Germany, Austria-Hungary began looking for other places to play empire, and as it focused on the Danube, The Balkans were looking tasty, particularly as the falling star of the Ottomans was no longer able to maintain control, especially after the Balkan Wars in 1912 and 1913. Austria's destiny was in the Balkans, and Serbia in particular. France, for its part, was still upset about the thrashing they got in 1871, and was always raring to take back Alsace and Lorraine. Russia was reeling from the defeat Japan had dealt it in 1905, and was increasingly preoccupied with protecting the Slavs of Europe, namely in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, as Russia was the largest Slavic country. Though, of course, I don't think it would be controversial to say Russia wouldn't necessarily free the Slavs, but put them under new management. These geopolitical tensions culminated in the assassination of Archduke Francis Ferdinand of Austria, heir to the throne, by a radical Serbian nationalist in 1914. The excuse the many great powers of Europe were looking for to go to war had come. Austria attacked Serbia in retribution, Russia came to Serbia's aid, Germany came to Austria's, and France came to Russia's. Germany wished to attack France through Belgium, and when Belgium refused, Germany did so anyway, causing Britain to send forces. Italy was seduced into betraying Germany for a chance to nab Italian-speaking territories in Austria, while the Ottomans joined Germany and Austria for a chance to salvage its crumbling empire. The result was called the Great War, a war to end all wars, as one so naively put. We know it as the First World War, for as terrible as it was, there would be a sequel. I don't want to focus too long on it, as those 4 years deserve a far more thorough treatment. But the horrible slaughter of men on an industrial scale with new technologies created a unique kind of cultural trauma. The previous century of optimism, that man could conquer the world and his worst tendencies with science and technology, was soundly put to pasture, as those very things created death on an unprecedented scale. One historical blog calls it the dying splendor of the old world. When the smoke settled, the guns falling silent on that day, November 11th, 1918, the world would never be the same. Famine, death, destruction had claimed perhaps 18 million souls, and left the survivors on both sides fatigued and frustrated. Worker strikes and protests occurred in France and Britain, while full-on revolutions occurred in Germany, Russia, and Ottoman Turkey. Austria-Hungary collapsed as its various ethnicities, itching for reform, wrestled for independence. Though the war ended in 1918, and Germany and Austria had lost, the fighting, of course, did not stop. Independence movements and revolutions ensured civil war, and violence continued for years more. The dual monarchy of Austria-Hungary fell apart after years of military defeat and soaring food prices. Once the United States of America entered the war, its President Wilson's vision for a post-war Europe called for every ethnic minority to have its own state. And the dual monarchy's ethnicities took and ran with this. The northern Slavs, Czechs and Slovaks, and the southern Slavs, Slovenes, Croats, and Serbs, created their own states of Czechoslovakia and the state of the Slovenes, Croats, and Serbs, which soon united with Serbia to create a united kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes. It might be more familiar as Yugoslavia, which it would rename itself to in 1929. Meanwhile, the Italians gobbled up a little land here and there on their side of the Alps. The Hungarian parliament decided it was best to terminate its association with Austria, and declared the country a republic, but soon had its hands full with a communist revolution. Hungary's neighbors took advantage of this, Czechoslovakia making good on the second half of its name, not yet Yugoslavia taking the southern Slavic portions of Hungary, and Romania gobbling up Transylvania. The many Germans in all these territories were no longer representatives of an imperial ruling elite, but minorities stranded in the new nation-states. But at least the Germans of Burgenland were able to join Austria, and Austria attempted to constitute itself as a republic, and laid claim to German-speaking territories in Bohemia, but Czechoslovakia actually controlled them. This Republic of German Austria wanted to reunite with Germany. After all, without the Habsburgs in charge, what was stopping them? But, of course, the victors of the First World War weren't about to let the losers actually gain any territory. Right to self-determination be damned. Also, the little western bit of Austria, Vorarlberg, tried to join Switzerland, but this fell through. The powers that be felt Switzerland would become too powerful. In the German Empire, what began as a sailor revolt against a feudal order to wage a last-ditch battle against the British Royal Navy spread across the entirety of Germany, until finally the Kaiser and all the other rulers of the German states were forced to abdicate, and all the states became republics. They all preserved the German Empire, however, as a federal republic, known to history as the Weimar Republic, after the city of Weimar, where it was formerly founded. But its official name was the same, Deutsches Reich, the German realm. On top of this new liberal republic, a couple socialist republics rose up, most notably in Bavaria, the Bavarian Soviet Republic, inspired by the October Revolution and Russian Soviet Republic, which was busy fighting a bloody civil war. I haven't been able to find if any of the new German republics ever seriously considered seceding from the new Germany, but I figure had the Bavarian Soviet Republic succeeded, Bavaria might have become a fifth Germany. It didn't, of course, and the socialists were crushed. In a fateful moment of world history, and what many consider was the linchpin that prevented the presaged world revolution, when the communist Spartacus League led an uprising in 1919, the ruling Social Democrats of the Republic decided they wanted to preserve parliamentary liberal democracy and allied with the army and put down the communists. Betrayal of the proletariat or the preservation of freedom and democracy? You decide. But the Social Democrats, led by Frederick Ebert, were the ones who had to face the music in the peace talks at Versailles. In the end, Germany was forced to cede back Alsace-Lorraine to France, Polish-speaking territories in the east to the new Polish Republic, some other lands to Denmark, Belgium, Czechoslovakia, and Lithuania, and the lands of Danzig and the Saarland as sort of independent regions placed under the jurisdiction of the newly formed League of Nations. On top of that, France, Belgium, and Britain were allowed to occupy the now demilitarized Rhineland, and Germany was saddled with a huge war indemnity, essentially taking the blame for the whole war. And Austria was not allowed to join Germany. The vengeance of the victorious powers had been dealt, but many observers noted it was not a peace that could last. During the war, the military essentially ruled Germany as a dictatorship, and reassured everyone, the citizens and the soldiers, that we are totally winning, guys, any day now. Well, in a sneaky move, the two officers in charge, Hindenburg and Ludendorff, when they knew they were going to lose, stepped down and gave the problem of peace to the civilian government, the Social Democrats. So when the Treaty of Versailles was signed, and many proud, patriotic Germans were angered by this humiliation, they were confused as to how a country on the brink of victory could have lost so soundly. To cope with this dissonance, a narrative was created, the stab-in-the-back myth, which claimed that the German army was this close to winning the war. But those conniving liberals and socialists conspired to betray Germany and her people. A number of minorities, most famously the Jews, were accused of being front and center of this betrayal. And this story was taken up and ran with by agitators looking to redeem Germany's broken honor. The harsh penalties on Germany and her economy, along with a worldwide depression in 1929, exacerbated German inflation and unemployment. Food and heating costs skyrocketed, with people famously carrying around wheelbarrows of German marks because they were so devalued, or even just burning them for warmth. In such an environment, political extremism flourishes, and far-right and far-left movements happily swelled with young, energetic, and angry Germans looking for some solution to this crisis. The most famous of these groups were the National Socialist German Workers' Party, known to us today as the Nazis. Nazi ideology is complex, and I don't really want to get into the nitty-gritty, as it also changed during the interwar period and depending on the needs and demands of the party's leadership, which after 1921 was the Austrian-born Adolf Hitler. But a common thread was to blame Germany's woes on the conspiracy of communists, liberals, financiers, and especially the Jews. The rise of the Nazi Party enabled them to establish a dictatorship in the shaky democracy of the Weimar Republic. Here, clashes between Nazi brownshirts and militant communists were common, and by the end, the German people were just happy to have some semblance of order. Such a heavy price they paid for security, as the Nazi government did not tolerate opposition and aspired to total control of German society. To them, the German people were part of the great Aryan race, the mightiest breed of man destined to rule the world. Thus, it was Germany's destiny and right to conquer and expand, and frighteningly exterminate whatsoever lesser races should stand in her way. The Nazis, with their almost apocalyptic vision of global war and conquest, began an aggressive program of rearmament, remilitarizing the Rhineland. The League of Nations, weary from the war and unwilling to send more young men to die in another, felt it better to appease Germany in its actions. But give a mouse a cookie. Germany would link up with Austrian Nazis and annex the country, at last reunifying the two after so many centuries. Soon, it was demanded the Germans in Czechoslovakia were returned to the fatherland, and Britain and France acquiesced, leaving Czechoslovakia high and dry. Destabilized, the country was soon occupied in its entirety by Germany. Had Hitler been content with this, it is highly possible this is what Germany would look like today, similar to Big Germany of the Confederation. But you know the story. Hitler demanded the return of the Polish corridor to reconnect Prussia with the rest of Germany. The Allies said no, and Germany invaded Poland. Soon, Hitler turned the Wehrmacht on France and the Low Countries, and World War II was in swing. And like many sequels, this one was bigger and badder. Fighting took place on just about every continent, especially after 1941, when Japan and America got in on the fun. As communism was antithetical to the tenets of the Nazis and their National Socialist ideology, a war between Germany and the Soviet Union was inevitable, framed as a climactic clash for the world's destiny. The Eastern Front saw the greatest loss of human life. All the while, the Nazis were working on their great, evil project of genocide against those they deemed unworthy of life. The Holocaust is the name given to the intentional and systematic slaughter of Jews, Gypsies, the disabled, homosexuals, and Slavs, killed in death camps, forced labor, famine, disease, or just plain murdered in cold blood. True numbers are hard to come by, but perhaps as many as 20 million died during the Holocaust. All this in the quest to build a greater German Reich, one to last 1,000 years. In Hitler's vision, it would embrace all the German lands, along with their estranged Germanic brethren in the Low Countries and Scandinavia, and the great European plain, once it had been liquidated of its over 100 million inhabitants. But when the war was all said and done, after 6 years of brutal fighting and the many operations and offensives that culminated in the Allied occupation of Germany, some 80 million people lay dead, and a continent in ruins. Europe was spent, the last of her strength exhausted in this titanic struggle. From the ashes, the United States and the Soviet Union alone possessed the capabilities to assert themselves. In the quest to rebuild a new world order, the Allies divided Germany into zones, while they decided what fate the broken land deserved. One Henry Morgenthau, United States Secretary of the Treasury, in a particularly vindictive move, proposed Germany be fractured into 3 independent states, while its industry would be dismantled, and even the very forests of Germany removed, so nothing could fuel a future German war machine. Besides American deforestation of the country, his plan fell through. Eventually, it was determined Germany and Austria would be divided into occupational zones until a new, democratic, and peaceful Germany and Austria could be constituted. Meanwhile, however, Germany's sins entailed that her eastern lands would be violently wrenched off and given to Poland as spoils, and as a consolation because the Soviets took Poland's eastern lands. The recovered territories, the lands of Germany east of the river Oder, had slowly been acquired by Prussia over centuries, but had once been part of the medieval Kingdom of Poland. When the Soviet Red Army broke into eastern Germany, many Germans in these lands fled, were expelled, or simply killed in vengeance. Soviet authorities essentially placed these lands under Polish rule, which was now organized as a Soviet socialist puppet state under the local communists. Of course, Joseph Stalin kept the northern half of Prussia for himself and Russia, to whom it still belongs as of 2023 as the Kaliningrad Oblast. These recovered territories are almost entirely inhabited by Poles, and Kaliningrad by Russians, despite their association with Germans and Germany since the Middle Ages and the Ostsiedlung. But despite the initial desire to see Germany reborn, the tensions of the victors, especially the Americans and Soviets, began the Cold War, a grand ideological game of geopolitics through the second half of the 20th century. The US, Britain, and France combined their zones into a new Federal Republic of Germany, while Soviet-backed German communists formed their own German Democratic Republic from the Soviet zone. And so, as an iron curtain descended over Europe, a West and an East Germany took shape. Despite similar attempts, ultimately the Soviets withdrew from Austria, and a new Republic of Austria was formed, again forbidden from joining either Germany. Nobody expected Germany to be divided in such a way, but as the Cold War in the 20th century wore on, nobody expected it to end anytime soon. As the border between the US-dominated NATO and the Soviet-dominated Warsaw Pact, West and East Germany were the setting of many examples of Cold War espionage, intrigue, politics, and even a little conflict here and there. The first major crisis of the Cold War was the Berlin blockade. Berlin had been divided into zones, like the rest of the country, and when the battle lines hardened, West Berlin belonged to the West, and East Berlin to the East. Stalin attempted to squeeze the enclave west side of the city, but in the face of Allied air relief, relented, and this set the tone for the rest of the Cold War. Much fiction, from spy novels to movies, are set in Germany during this period, and a physical symbol of this conflict and of Germany's rending was a large concrete wall erected along the border of the two Berlins to prevent the East Berliners from fleeing their workers' paradise. This division and domination were Germany's penance. But even so, West Germany recovered quickly from the war, growing economically during the Wirtschaftswunder in the 50s, and joining the European Common Market, which would evolve into the European Union. Tensions were highest in the 60s during the Cuban Missile Crisis, but by the 80s the Soviet Union was suffering from aging leadership and stagnation. East Germany, too, was being far surpassed by its western neighbor, and the moral desire to maintain the Marxist-Leninist way was waning, especially once the other great communist power, the People's Republic of China, was transitioning to market reforms. Attempts to liberalize the Soviet Union by Gorbachev only hastened its downfall, and soon the communists in Eastern Europe were giving way to liberal democracy, transitioning into a newer, freer Central Europe. Finally, in 1990, after 45 years of separation, East Germany joined West Germany, becoming part of the modern Federal Republic of Germany, and that infernal wall was torn down. A year later, the Soviet Union itself would dissolve, its 15 republics going their own way. And thus, the Cold War was over, and the West won, with one observer even going so far to say the world had reached the end of history. Germany, as part of the reunification, agreed to reaffirm that yes, Austria was to remain independent, and yes, Germany gave up its claims to the recovered territories of Poland. Germany has since grown to be a major world power, with the fifth largest economy, largest in Europe, a strong manufacturing, financial, and technological leader, with a well-developed and stable democratic government. It is considered by some to be the mightiest nation in the European Union. Regardless, it also possesses a strong and advanced military, and a presence on the world stage in the United Nations, NATO, the G7, and the G20. But even so, after over 30 years since reunification, Germany still carries the scars of the Cold War, with marked divides between East and West in terms of economy, infrastructure, and politics. All the same, Germany has made a remarkable transition after all the upheaval of the previous century. Austria, too, has risen to be a strong, developed economy, successful democracy, and major tourism destination. Along with Luxembourg and Liechtenstein, all four of the German brothers aren't doing too bad. So there you have it. From Roman times to the Middle Ages into the modern era, Germany has evolved and shrunk and grown and shifted around. Now we know why the Netherlands isn't considered German, and why the German-speaking countries Switzerland, Austria, Luxembourg, and Liechtenstein are independent of Germany. But what awaits these countries in the future? I don't know, but we're already 20 years into the 21st century, and it's already looking like it won't be boring, at least. It's been a long road, and honestly, I thought I could tell the story in one video instead of 6. But I'm glad I did. I hope you had fun. This is a topic that I wanted to talk about for a long time because I thought it was pretty interesting, and I wanted to ask a few questions that might not have been immediately obvious. Next time, well, I'll cover some other interesting historical question or concept. Until then, thank you so much for watching.